At 2 a.m., the cardiac ward was quieter than usual. Monitors beeped softly. Hallway lights were dimmed. Most patients had finally drifted to sleep. Except for one. George Carter, 82 years old, sat upright in his hospital bed, breathing too fast. His hands trembled as he searched the room with frightened eyes. "No." His voice cracked. "Emma." He looked toward the empty doorway. "Emma." The nurse at the station hurried inside. "Mr. Carter?" George didn't seem to hear her. "Emma." Another nurse arrived. Neither of them knew who Emma was. His chart listed no daughter, no wife, no relative by that name. His heart monitor began climbing. One nurse reached for the emergency medication. Before she could administer it, another voice spoke gently from the hallway. "Wait." A young nurse stepped quietly into the room. She wasn't carrying a syringe. She wasn't calling another doctor. She simply walked to George's bedside and pulled up a chair. She smiled. "Mr. Carter." George looked at her. His breathing remained uneven. The young nurse slowly placed her hand over his. "I'm right here." Then, she began to sing, softly, barely louder than a whisper, an old lullaby almost forgotten by time. No one in the room recognized it. George did. His shoulders slowly relaxed, his breathing steadied, his frightened eyes softened. Without another word, he gently squeezed the young nurse's hand, closed his eyes, and quietly fell asleep. At that exact moment, the elevator doors opened at the end of the hallway. A tall man in a dark overcoat stepped out carrying a travel bag. He froze. From across the corridor, he watched the entire scene without making a sound. Liam Carter had landed in Seattle less than an hour earlier. 33 years old. Founder and CEO of Carter Infrastructure Group. His company designed bridges, highways, and public transportation projects across the country. People called him brilliant. They rarely called him happy. He had lost both parents in a car accident when he was 12. Everything that came afterward, school, college, his first business, every important milestone, had one constant: his grandfather. George Carter had raised him with more patience than money. He taught Liam how to ride a bicycle, how to tie a tie, how to shake someone's hand properly, and, according to George himself, how not to burn grilled cheese. Only one lesson had failed. Never work so much that people have to schedule time to miss you. Liam smiled every time he remembered that sentence, then ignored it. His company grew. Meetings multiplied. Flights replaced weekends. Phone calls replaced visits. He always promised himself he would spend more time with George. Just after this project, after this quarter, after one more deadline. Tonight, that promise suddenly felt dangerously late. The young nurse quietly adjusted George's blanket before leaving the room. Her name badge read Hannah Brooks, 28 years old, night shift cardiac nurse. She had been working at St. Gabriel Medical Center for almost 4 years. Other nurses joked that Hannah had accidentally become everyone's granddaughter. She remembered birthdays, favorite desserts, who liked jazz, who hated oatmeal, which patients secretly preferred extra pillows but refused to ask. She believed something many people considered old-fashioned. Lonely hearts needed conversations almost as much as medication. She wasn't always graceful. In fact, she was famously clumsy. Pens slipped from her pockets daily. Coffee cups rarely survived a full week around her. She once walked into the wrong patient room and spent 5 minutes explaining blood pressure medication before realizing the man was waiting for his orthopedic surgeon. Everyone laughed, including the patient, and Hannah laughed hardest. George had met Hannah 3 months earlier, the first night he refused to sleep. Not because of pain, because hospitals reminded him too much of losing his wife. Hannah had noticed him quietly staring out the window. Instead of increasing his sedatives, she asked, "What kept you calm when you couldn't sleep as a child?" George answered without opening his eyes. "My mother sang." The next night, Hannah searched online until she found an old version of the same lullaby. She sang badly. George admitted as much, but he slept. Ever since then, whenever anxiety found him first, Hannah sang. Around 4 that morning, George slowly opened one eye. The room was quiet. Hannah sat beside the bed finishing paperwork. She looked up. "Oh, you're awake." George immediately closed his eye again, pretending. Hannah smiled to herself. "I know you're awake." "Nothing." She stood, adjusted his blanket, turned toward the door. Without opening his eyes, George suddenly said, "You missed the 3rd verse." Hannah froze. then burst into laughter. You were pretending to sleep? George opened both eyes proudly. I had to verify your consistency. You tricked me. I'm 82. I've earned entertainment. Hannah shook her head. I should report you. You'd lose. Why? I'm adorable. She laughed again. I'll let the cardiologist decide that. George grinned like a mischievous schoolboy. Outside the room, Liam finally walked in. George noticed him immediately. My favorite overworked executive. Liam bent down and hugged him carefully. I came as fast as I could. George smiled warmly. I know. You flew overnight. You didn't have to. I wanted to. George studied his grandson's tired face. You still look like someone who thinks coffee is a personality. Liam chuckled quietly. It isn't? No. It's a warning sign. Even Hannah couldn't hide a smile. She quietly excused herself to give them privacy. Liam turned slightly. Excuse me. But she was already halfway down the hallway. Another nurse handed Hannah a chart. A patient in room 418 needed assistance. Her shift was almost over. Within minutes, she disappeared into the maze of hospital corridors. Liam looked after her. He realized something surprising. He didn't know her name. He hadn't thanked her. He hadn't even seen her face clearly for more than a few seconds. All he really remembered was her voice, soft enough to calm fear, warm enough to make an old man sleep. Somehow, that voice stayed with him long after the hallway had fallen silent. And for reasons Liam couldn't yet explain, he found himself hoping he would hear it again. After that night, Liam Carter began coming to the hospital more often. At least, he tried. He moved meetings, delayed flights, took calls from the parking garage, signed contracts from the waiting room, with his laptop balanced on one knee and hospital coffee slowly destroying his faith in humanity. But somehow, he kept missing Hannah. When Liam arrived at 6 in the morning, Hannah had just finished her shift and gone home. When he came at midnight, she had been called to another floor. When he returned after lunch, George cheerfully informed him that the singing nurse only worked nights, because apparently hospitals enjoyed turning human schedules into riddles. Liam never said he was looking for her. George never said he noticed, which meant George definitely noticed. The old man made it his new personal project. At dinner, he began eating slowly, painfully slowly. One spoonful of soup could take him 4 minutes if he believed Hannah might pass by. Liam watched him one evening, suspicious. Grandpa, George looked up innocently. Yes? You've been chewing pudding for 30 seconds. I believe in respecting texture. It's pudding. All food has dignity. Liam narrowed his eyes. George took another microscopic bite, then glanced toward the hallway. Hannah did not appear. Another nurse walked past. George sighed and suddenly finished the pudding in 3 bites. Liam leaned back. You were stalling. I was dining. You were matchmaking. George's eyes widened in false shock. At my age, I barely have the energy to manipulate medication schedules. That wasn't a denial. It wasn't meant to be. The next night, George tried again. He requested tea, then a second blanket, then claimed his socks felt philosophically uneven. By the time Liam understood what was happening, Hannah's shift had ended 10 minutes earlier. George looked deeply disappointed. Liam stood beside the bed, arms folded. Your socks are fine. George wiggled his toes under the blanket. They were fine after I expressed my concerns. You made me call a nurse over socks. A successful leader delegates. Liam tried to look annoyed. He failed. For the first time in a long while, George saw the beginning of a smile on his grandson's face. Not a full one, not yet, but enough. Hannah, meanwhile, heard about the grandson long before she properly met him. George spoke of Liam often, though always sideways, as if praising him too directly might embarrass them both. He builds bridges, George told Hannah one night while she checked his blood pressure. Literal ones. Mostly, though the boy could use help with the emotional kind. Hannah smiled. He visits you, when he can. That matters. George looked at the doorway, where no one stood. It does, but he always arrives carrying work in his pockets, even when his hands are empty. Hannah tightened the cuff gently. He's worried about you. He is. George's face softened. He has a beautiful smile, you know. Hannah looked up. George continued quietly now. He just forgot. The words stayed with her longer than she expected. She had cared for many elderly patients with busy families. Some were angry, some were bitter. George was neither. He simply missed someone who was still alive. That, Hannah thought, Might be the saddest kind of missing. Liam finally met Hannah by accident in the hospital cafeteria. It was nearly 1 in the morning. He had come from a late project review and found George asleep. Not wanting to wake him, Liam wandered downstairs in search of coffee strong enough to excuse its own existence. The cafeteria was almost empty. At a corner table, a woman in blue scrubs sat with 2 coffee cups, a half-eaten muffin, and approximately 7 pens that seemed to be escaping from her pocket. One fell to the floor, then another, then a third. She stared at them with tired resignation. Liam bent down and picked them up. "I think your pens are making a break for it." Hannah looked up. For a moment, neither of them recognized the other. Then she laughed softly. "They do this when morale is low." He handed them back. "Do pens have morale?" "Mine do. They work nights." That made him smile. A real one, brief but unmistakable. Hannah noticed. Something about that smile felt strangely familiar, as if someone had described it to her before. Liam gestured toward the chair across from her. "May I?" "Only if you're not planning to judge the coffee." "I was planning to file a complaint with whoever heard it." She pushed one of the cups toward him. "Then you'll need evidence." He sat. For 20 minutes, they talked without knowing who they were to each other. Liam assumed she was visiting a patient because her badge had flipped backward beneath her cardigan. Hannah assumed he was someone's tired family member, which was true, but not nearly enough. They talked about hospital coffee, bad vending machine choices, and the strange emotional danger of being awake after midnight. Liam learned she worked with elderly patients, though she didn't mention George by name. Hannah learned he designed bridges, though he said it almost apologetically, as if admitting he spent most of his life thinking about steel instead of people. "You must like building things that last," she said. Liam looked into his coffee. "I used to, and now?" He gave a small shrug. "Now I'm starting to wonder if I've been building the wrong things." Hannah did not rush to answer. That was what Liam noticed most. She gave silence room to breathe. When her pager finally buzzed, she stood too quickly, knocking one pen to the floor again. Liam picked it up. She smiled. "Thank you, mysterious coffee witness." "Liam, Hannah." Her name landed quietly inside him. Before he could say more, she hurried away. Only after she disappeared into the elevator did Liam realize something. He still had no idea whether she was the singing nurse, but he hoped she was. 2 nights later, everything changed. Liam was in the parking garage taking a call when his phone vibrated with an alert from the hospital. George's room. Urgent. He ended the call mid-sentence and ran. By the time he reached the cardiac ward, doctors and nurses were already moving quickly in and out of George's room. His grandfather lay unconscious on the bed, pale and still, and beside him, holding his hand, was Hannah. Not calm now, not professional in the polished way nurses learned to be. Her eyes were wet. Her other hand rested gently against George's shoulder, as if she could anchor him there by touch alone. "Stay with us," she whispered. "Come on, Mr. Carter. You promised to correct my singing." Liam stopped in the doorway. The sight hit him harder than the machines. Hannah was crying. Not like a nurse, like family. For one confused, painful second, Liam thought she must be someone important to George. A niece, a hidden relative, someone he had failed to know about because he was always too late. Hannah looked up and saw him. Her face changed. Liam. Hearing his name in her voice broke the spell. He stepped forward, fear tightening his chest. "What happened?" "We're stabilizing him," she said quickly, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. He had a sudden rhythm change. "The doctor's here. He's responding." Liam looked from her hand on George's to her tears. "You know him?" Hannah blinked, then understood what he meant. "Yes." Her voice trembled. "I'm his night nurse." The words settled between them. Night nurse. The woman from the cafeteria. The woman with runaway pens. The woman George had tried so hard to make him meet. The woman who sang him to sleep. Liam looked at his grandfather, then back at Hannah. For the first time, he understood that while he had been arriving late with excuses and coffee cups, this woman had been there through the darkest hours, holding George's hand, learning his fears, remembering his songs, crying when he nearly left. And the realization filled Liam with something too complicated to name, and the beginning of a feeling he was not ready for, because Hannah Brooks had become important to his grandfather before Liam even knew her name, and somehow, in one terrible hospital room, she had become important to him too. George survived the night. By morning, His heart rhythm had stabilized, his color had returned, and his first whispered complaint was that the hospital oatmeal looked morally defeated. Liam nearly laughed and cried at the same time. The doctors called it a warning. Not the end, not yet, but a reminder that George's condition could change quickly, especially under stress and exhaustion. Hannah stood at the foot of the bed during the update, professional again, though Liam could still see the redness around her eyes. When the doctor left, Liam remained beside George's bed, unable to shake the image of Hannah holding his grandfather's hand, like she had been holding him there for months. Later that afternoon, while George slept, Liam found the care binder on the small table near the window. He opened it without thinking. Medication notes, night observations, changes in appetite, episodes of confusion, small comforts that helped him sleep. And again, one name appeared in the margins. H. Brooks, patient anxious at 2:10 a.m. Sat with him until breathing slowed. Patient asked for old bridge stories. Listened for 40 minutes. Patient refused soup, accepted after singing. Patient mentioned missing grandson, reassured gently. Liam stopped reading. His throat tightened. For months, Hannah had been documenting more than care. She had been witnessing his grandfather's loneliness, the kind Liam had been too busy to see. When Hannah entered quietly to check the monitor, Liam turned toward her. "You were here all this time." She paused. "I work nights." "That's not what I mean." Her face softened. She looked at George, then back at Liam. He didn't like being alone after midnight. Liam closed the binder slowly. "And I let him be." Hannah did not rush to comfort him. Maybe that was why her eventual answer mattered. "You're here now." He looked at her. She smiled gently. "That counts too." George recovered enough by the third day to resume interfering in other people's lives. He began with breakfast. A tray of plain porridge arrived from the cafeteria. Liam tried to feed him a spoonful, because the doctor insisted George needed to eat. George tasted it. His expression became tragic. "This is not food. It's porridge. It is wallpaper paste with ambition." Liam closed his eyes. "Grandpa." George pointed weakly toward Hannah, who had just entered with fresh water. "She makes it better." Hannah froze. "I do not make porridge." George nodded. "Exactly. That's why yours is better." Liam looked at her. Hannah lifted both hands. "I am not part of this conspiracy." George leaned back, enjoying himself. "You should marry someone who can cook." Liam choked on air. Hannah's eyes widened. George looked between them. "What?" "I'm sick, not blind." Liam set down the spoon. "You need rest." "I need seasoning." Hannah turned away, pretending to adjust the IV tubing so no one would see her smile. George, of course, saw it. He saw everything. After that night, Liam started waiting for Hannah when her shift ended. The first time, she found him outside the hospital entrance at dawn, holding 2 coffees. She looked suspicious. Is one of those a bribe? Peace offering. For what? For assuming you were family before realizing you were the reason he still felt like he had some. That made her go quiet. She accepted the coffee. They walked together to the staff parking lot while the city slowly woke around them. At first, the conversations were light. Bad cafeteria muffins. George's suspicious hatred of oatmeal. The exact number of pens Hannah had lost in 1 week. Then, slowly, the conversations deepened. Liam told her about losing his parents when he was 12, about George showing up at the school office in a wrinkled shirt, trying to look strong when his own hands were shaking, about how he learned early that if he stayed busy enough, grief had fewer chances to catch him. Hannah told him about becoming a nurse after caring for her mother through a long illness, about how hospitals scared her at first, about realizing that some patients did not need someone fearless beside them, they needed someone honest enough to sit in the fear with them. Liam listened to her the way he listened to no one else, and Hannah noticed. Of course she did. One rainy morning, her shift ended during a downpour. She stepped outside without an umbrella and laughed tiredly at the sky. Perfect. Even the weather has night shift energy. Liam, standing near the entrance, immediately removed his coat and placed it around her shoulders. Hannah looked up. "You'll get soaked. I've survived worse. You build bridges. That doesn't make you waterproof." "No, but it makes me stubborn." She smiled, pulling his coat closer. The hospital awning sheltered them from most of the rain, but not from the quiet that suddenly opened between them. Liam looked at her face, pale with exhaustion, soft beneath the morning light, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with trying. For weeks, he had been grateful to her. then dependent on seeing her, then quietly afraid of how much peace her presence gave him. Now there was no pretending. He lifted one hand slowly, giving her time to step away, and brushed a raindrop from her cheek. "Hannah." Her breath caught. "Yes?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "May I?" She understood, and after one heartbeat, she nodded. The kiss was brief, gentle, almost careful enough to hurt. His lips touched hers beneath the hospital awning, while rain fell beyond them, and for a few seconds, the world became strangely still. No monitors or alarms, no fear of being too late. Only warmth and breath, only the quiet beginning of something neither of them had expected to find in a place built around endings. When they pulled apart, Hannah looked down, smiling shyly. Liam rested his forehead lightly against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the cafeteria." She laughed softly. "That was the night I dropped 3 pens. 4. You counted? I'm observant. You're strange. I've been told." She smiled again, but there were tears in her eyes now. Not sad ones. The kind that come when life offers something beautiful at the worst possible time. 3 days later, Hannah received the email. She opened it in the staff break room during a quiet hour before dawn. A specialized cardiac nursing fellowship in California. 1 year, fully funded, a program she had applied to months earlier, never expecting to be chosen. Her hands trembled as she read the acceptance letter. It was everything she had worked toward: advanced training, better opportunities, a chance to grow beyond night shifts and borrowed coffee. She should have been only happy. Part of her was. But when she stepped back into George's room, Liam was sitting beside the bed, reading aloud from an old book of bridge designs, while George pretended not to enjoy it. Hannah stopped in the doorway. Liam looked up and smiled at her. That smile George had once described, the one he had forgotten. It was back now, and Hannah realized, with a painful little twist in her chest, that she had become part of the reason. George noticed the envelope in her hand. His expression changed slightly. He knew. Somehow, as always, he knew, but Liam did not. Not yet. Hannah folded the email printout and slipped it into her pocket before entering the room. She smiled. She checked George's vitals. She laughed when he complained that Liam read technical footnotes with no drama. And she said nothing about California, because for the first time in her life, the dream she had been waiting for felt less like an escape and more like a goodbye she was not ready to say. George knew about California before Liam did. Hannah never told him directly. She didn't have to. George noticed the folded paper in her pocket, the way her smile paused half a second too long, and how she looked at Liam when he wasn't watching. For 3 nights, George said nothing. Then, on the 4th, while Hannah adjusted his blanket, he murmured, "1 year is not forever." Hannah's hand stilled. She looked at him. George's eyes remained closed, but the corner of his mouth lifted. "I was old before you were born, child. I know the face of someone packing her heart before her suitcase." Hannah sat quietly beside him. "I haven't told him. I know. I don't want to hurt him." George opened his eyes. "Then don't lie to him for too long." She swallowed. "I'm scared if I go, I'll lose this." George looked toward the hallway, where Liam was arguing softly with a vending machine that had stolen his dollar. A fond smile crossed the old man's face. Love that disappears because of distance was not love. It was convenience. Hannah's eyes filled. "And if he asks me to stay," George's voice softened, "then make sure he asks, because he loves you, not because he's afraid." That was the last advice George gave her as a patient. 2 days later, he was discharged. Liam wanted to hire a private nurse. George refused. Liam wanted to install 3 new monitoring systems. George refused 2 and negotiated 1. Liam wanted to move into the guest room. George stared at him for 5 seconds and said, "You snore like construction equipment." Still, he agreed to come home under one condition: a small dinner. No business calls, no hospital food, no oatmeal pretending to be edible. Hannah arrived that evening with flowers and a casserole she swore she had not made herself. George examined it suspiciously. "Did you cook this?" "No." "Good. Then it has a chance." Liam laughed from the kitchen doorway, and Hannah looked over just in time to see it. The smile George had once described. Beautiful. Still a little rusty, but real. They ate at George's small dining table, not in some grand room, but in the warm kitchen of the house where Liam had grown up. There were framed photos on the walls, old bridge sketches in the study, and a crooked wooden birdhouse in the backyard, that Liam denied building badly as a child. George told the story anyway. Hannah laughed until Liam covered his face. After dinner, George asked Hannah to help him to the porch. The night air was cool, and the porch light cast a golden circle over the steps. George sat in his old chair and reached into his cardigan pocket. He pulled out a silver pocket watch, worn smooth at the edges. Hannah looked at it, confused. "Mr. Carter." "George," he corrected. "George, I can't take that." "You can. It's yours. It was my wife's father's before it was mine. That's even more reason I can't." George placed it carefully in her palm. "I have not heard this house laugh like that in years." Hannah's eyes began to shine. George's hand closed gently over hers. "You brought music back to a place that had forgotten it had walls thin enough to carry joy." She shook her head. "I was just doing my job." "No." His gaze sharpened, still clever despite the tiredness. "You were doing far more than that. Don't insult an old man by pretending I don't know the difference." Hannah looked down at the watch. The metal was warm from his hand. George smiled. "Keep it, not because you are staying, not because you are leaving, because time is precious either way." Behind them, unseen in the doorway, Liam watched. He did not hear every word, only enough to know something in the world was shifting. Later that night, after Hannah left, George asked Liam to sit with him in the study. The room smelled of old paper, wood polish, and the pipe tobacco George had given up 15 years earlier, but still pretended not to miss. Liam sat across from him. George looked tired. Too tired. But his eyes were clear. "Don't be like me," George said. Liam frowned. "You raised me. That's the best thing anyone ever did." George waved that away. "I don't mean that." "What do you mean?" George looked toward the photo of his late wife on the desk. "I waited too long for many things. Too long to apologize. Too long to forgive. Too long to tell your grandmother I loved her without making a joke out of it." Liam's face softened. She knew. Yes, but she deserved to hear it more. George turned back to him. "When something good comes into a lonely house, don't stand in the doorway wondering whether you deserve it. Open the door." Liam said nothing. George smiled faintly. "You love her." Liam lowered his eyes. "Yes." The word surprised even him. So simple, so late. George's expression filled with tenderness. "Then don't wait until life has to frighten you into honesty." Liam looked up. "Grandpa." George reached across the armrest and squeezed his hand. "I'm not leaving tonight, boy. I'm only giving advice before you pretend you didn't need it." Liam laughed softly, though his eyes were wet. For a while, they sat together without speaking. This time, Liam did not check his phone. The next morning, the house was very quiet. Too quiet. Liam found George in his bed just after sunrise, peaceful, one hand resting on the blanket. His face calm, almost amused, as if he had slipped away in the middle of a private joke. There was no panic, no pain, no hospital alarm. Just morning light across the room and the unbearable gentleness of goodbye. Hannah arrived 20 minutes later, after Liam called her without knowing who else to call. She came in still wearing yesterday's sweater, hair loose, eyes already full of fear. The moment she saw Liam's face, she understood. He did not say anything. He simply opened his arms. Hannah crossed the room and held him as he broke. For a long time, there was only grief. Then Liam noticed the envelope on George's bedside table. 2 names were written across the front. For Liam and Hannah. Together, preferably. Even through tears, Hannah let out a broken laugh. "That sounds like him." Liam opened it with shaking hands. Inside was 1 page in George's careful handwriting. "If the 2 of you are reading this letter together, it means one of 2 things. Either you finally listened to me, or I had to die to get both of you in the same room." Hannah covered her mouth. Liam laughed once, painfully. The letter continued. "Either way, I win." They both cried harder. "Liam, my boy, you were never too late for me. You came back. Remember that when guilt tries to rewrite the truth." Liam's hand trembled. "Hannah, you were never just my nurse. You were the song at the end of the hallway. Thank you for helping an old man sleep without fear." Hannah pressed the watch to her chest. "And now, both of you listen carefully. Life is short, but love does not have to be rushed. Build it like a bridge, patiently, honestly, strong enough for 2 people to cross, even when the distance looks frightening." The final line was written larger. "If you love each other, don't wait too long. I already used up enough waiting for all of us." The page lowered slowly. Liam and Hannah sat side by side on the edge of George's bed, holding the letter between them. Outside, morning light filled the room. And somehow, even in the first silence after George was gone, it felt like he had left one last bridge behind. 1 year later, Hannah Brooks came back to Seattle without telling Liam. California had changed her. Not into someone different, exactly, but into someone steadier. She had learned more, worked harder, cried less often in supply closets, and carried George's pocket watch in her bag every day, like a small silver reminder that time was precious either way. She arrived on a bright spring afternoon and went first to the park near St. Gabriel Medical Center. The same park where George used to sit during his better days, the same bench where he had once complained that hospital gardens were too decorative and not nearly judgmental enough. Hannah slowed when she saw someone already sitting there. Liam. He wore a dark coat, sleeves rolled slightly, a stack of blueprints beside him. For a moment, Hannah only stood still. Then he looked up. Everything in his face changed. Hannah. She smiled through the sudden ache in her chest. Hi. He stood too quickly, knocking one blueprint onto the grass. She laughed softly, still graceful. I build stable structures. I never claimed to be one. The old ease was still there. Under the nervousness. Under the year apart. Under everything they had not said over phone calls, letters, short visits, and long silences when missing each other, became too heavy for words. Liam picked up the blueprint and handed it to her. Hannah looked down. It was a design for a pedestrian bridge crossing the small creek that separated the hospital from the park. At the top, in clean lettering, was the name George Bridge. Hannah's eyes filled instantly. Liam, he looked toward the creek. Grandpa always said the most beautiful thing about a bridge wasn't the bridge itself, she remembered. Her voice trembled. It was helping two people meet. Liam nodded. I started designing it after you left. At first, I thought it was for him. He looked back at her. Then I realized it was for us too. Hannah held the blueprint against her chest. I didn't know if you'd still be here. I was. You didn't ask me to come back. I wanted to. Why didn't you? He gave a small, honest smile. Because George told me not to build cages and call them bridges. Hannah laughed through tears. That sounds like him. Liam stepped closer. He gave you the watch. She nodded and reached into her bag. The silver pocket watch rested in her palm, worn and familiar. Liam looked at it with quiet tenderness. He gave me something too. From his coat pocket, he took a small ring box. Hannah stopped breathing. Liam lowered himself to one knee beside the old bench, the bridge design spread open between them. Hannah Brooks, he said, voice unsteady but certain. My grandfather gave you the watch because he knew time mattered. He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, elegant and bright beneath the spring light. And I want to give you the rest of mine. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I don't want to rush you. I don't want to ask you to give up your dreams. I just want to build a life that's strong enough for both of them. Hannah pressed one hand to her mouth. Liam looked up at her. Will you marry me? For a second, she could not speak. Then she laughed and cried at once. Yes. Liam stood, and she threw her arms around him. The kiss that followed was warm, full of relief, and nothing like goodbye. Weeks later, the George Bridge opened on a clear morning. Doctors, nurses, patients, families, and neighbors gathered as Hannah and Liam cut the ribbon together. The first people to cross were an elderly couple holding hands. Then a little girl ran across laughing, her father chasing behind her. Hannah leaned into Liam's side. In her hand, George's watch ticked softly. The camera pulled back as people crossed the bridge in both directions, carrying flowers, coffee cups, hospital discharge papers, and ordinary hopes. And over it all, the memory of one old man seemed to smile. Some people spend their whole lives building bridges. George only needed one. George spent his life building bridges as an engineer, but the greatest bridge he ever built wasn't made of steel or stone. It was the one that connected two lonely hearts who might never have found each other without his quiet kindness. Sometimes, the people who leave us don't disappear from our lives. They simply become the reason we choose to love more bravely. I often think the most meaningful legacy we can leave behind isn't our success, our possessions, or even our achievements. It's the way we make people feel safe enough to stay, to forgive, and to begin again. In the end, perhaps that's the only kind of bridge that truly lasts. Now I'd love to hear from you. Has someone ever changed the direction of your life without even realizing it? Share your story in the comments. I read them more often than you might think. So here's something I'd love to ask you. If someone wrote a letter for you to read years from now, what would you hope it says? Leave your answer in the comments. I have a feeling many of us need those words today, and if stories that leave your heart a little warmer are the kind you enjoy, I'd be honored if you joined us by subscribing to Soul-Stirring Stories. There's always another journey waiting, and I hope to share the next one with you.